Anyong, magandang araw sa inyong lahat. So again, welcome to our subject, Conceptual Framework and Accounting Standards. And for today, we are about to finish the discussion of Conceptual Framework for Financial Reporting. So again, this is your instructor, Noel A. Bergonia. Okay, and let's start. No? So let's just have a short recap about what we have discussed in the previous video about the first 5 chapters of the conceptual framework. Okay, so we have started in chapter 1, okay, which is referring to the objectives of general purpose financial reporting, wherein the main objective of this general purpose financial report are to provide information, okay, to the primary users of financial information, such as the existing and potential investors, the lenders and the creditors, and also some other users of financial information in making economic decisions. Okay, also, in Chapter 2, we have discussed the qualitative characteristics of useful financial information, which actually contains yung fundamental and enhancing qualitative characteristics. So, sa fundamentals, meron po tayong relevance and faithful representation. While in the enhancing, we have yung VCAT, di ba? Verifiability, comparability, understandability, and timeliness. Then in chapter 3, we have talked about the financial statements and the reporting entity. So the financial statements are the reports or the output which the decisions of the users, okay, would be relied on, no? And we have discussed the various examples of financial statements, okay, especially for the types of parent and subsidiary relationship, okay, such as yung consolidated financial statements, unconsolidated financial statements, and combined financial statements. And the reporting entity is the one who is responsible for the preparation of these financial statements. And then also in chapter 4, we have discussed the various elements of financial statements such as yung assets, no, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. And we have also discussed as last part of the first video presentation about conceptual framework, okay, about the recognition, okay, which is putting or recording the amount in the face of the financial statements, as well as the recognition, which is talking about the removal of that element in the financial statement. Okay? So after we have recognized, no, ano ba yung recognition principle na diniscuss natin last time? It meets the criteria or the definition of an element in the financial statement, then you could put, no, that particular element or that particular transaction in our financial statements. So right now, we will be talking about, of course, no, kapag i-record na natin yung ating particular transaction and the financial statement, of course, we need to measure, no, by how much will this be recorded in our financial statements. Okay, so we are going to discuss, no, for this start of this video presentation, no, chapter 6, which is all about measurement. Okay, so when we talk about measurement, okay, kung yung recognition po is putting the amount or recording the amount on the face of the financial statement, measurement naman is the process of quantifying, okay, so putting in monetary terms, okay, an element recognized in the financial statement. So as mentioned to you a while ago, it is somehow putting peso value, okay, to our financial statement. May halaga ba? Dapat, di ba? Kasi nire-recognize natin, hindi kagaya ng pagmamahal niya, hindi, joke lang, okay? So we measure, we quantify that particular transaction, no, in our financial statement through the process of measurement or measuring. Since we are about to measure, we should have a basis, no? So the measurement basis is actually an identified feature, okay, which we are about to discuss in this particular chapter, okay, about the item being measured. So example would be mamaya i-discuss natin yung historical cost, fair value, or even fulfillment value. Okay, so we have various measurement bases to be discussed later. So in our standards, no, sa mga accounting standards that you will encounter in intermediate accounting as well as for other accounting subjects, okay, those standards have already containing the measurement principles, okay, or the basis of how they are going to measure that particular element in the financial statement. And of course, in our conceptual framework, it states that the description in that standard that you will be discussing in INTAC o kaya naman in AFAR, okay, should include, okay, number one, specifying techniques, okay, that may be or must be used in estimating, no, the measurement basis. So nakalagay po doon, no, paano mo i-record. Actually, for the standards, pag magbabasa na kayo ng standards, palagi nakalagay doon, initially, this will be the recorded value, then subsequently, this will be the recorded value. So, nandun po nakaspecify mismo kung paano natin imi-measure yung asset, liabilities, or any other elements in our financial statements. Okay? Aside from that, in the standard also specify a simplified measurement approach, no, so that it could provide information that is similar, okay, to the preferred measurement basis. So aside from the techniques, of course, some simplified measurements, some standards are putting as well some simple computations, even though it could have as well wordings lang na dinidiscuss yung computation, but at least, no, it has a simplified measurement approach on that standard. And lastly as well, no, the standard must contain, okay, explanation on how to modify that measurement basis. Okay, so for by excluding from fulfillment value of liability as an example, okay? So in various standards that you will study, okay, so makikita nyo po yung mga yan, okay, as measurement. But take note guys na nabanggit natin ito in the previous video that if the standard could not be able to provide the basis, then you need to go back to the conceptual framework, okay, as our basis. Okay? So, in accordance with our 2018 version of the conceptual framework, we have only two measurement bases. Okay? Pero bago ako mag-proceed doon sa two measurement bases, let me just give you an idea. Ilan po ba yung measurement bases doon sa 2010 version naman? Okay? So, in the 2010 version, actually, apat po yan. Okay? So, kaya pag nagsagot kayo ng multiple choice, make sure that you check the dates kung meron pong nakalagay na date or even the year or the version of the conceptual framework, since it is important. Kasi from apat doon sa 2010 version, it becomes 2 right now. Sir, paano yan kung silent yung particular question? It should be related already to the recent version of our conceptual framework, which is 2018. Okay, so sa 2010, apat po yan. We have number 1, historical. Okay, historical costs. Okay? So, mamaya, di-discuss din natin ang historical costs. Okay? Number 2 would be fair value or current cost or current value. Yan po yung nakalagay doon. Okay? Mamaya, we will also be discussing that. Another would be realizable value. Okay, so you are familiar with realizable value because of the net realizable value sa receivables discussion ninyo nung fundamentals, okay, and even in FABM. And lastly would be present value. Okay, so these are the four measurement bases on the 2010 version. Okay, so however, so pagdating ng 2018, okay, so it becomes to already we have the historical cost, which is actually na-retain, and then we have the current value, which is actually na-retain din. However, no, the current value includes already the discussion of fair value, value in use, and fulfillment value, as well as current costs, no? Sir, bakit nawala yung present value at saka realizable value? So later we'll try to explain that one by one kasi dadaanan naman natin itong historical cost and current values. Okay? So please take note of that as part of the one of the changes, no, in the measurement basis from 2010 to 2018 version. Okay? So right now, let's start with the measurement basis, okay, historical costs. Okay, so when we talk about historical cost, from the word itself, history, okay, so historical cost actually provides us the monetary information, okay, the quantitative information of the elements, which is actually derived from the price of the transaction or other event that gives rise to them. Okay, so in other words, historical costs seem to be the original transaction costs or the original transaction price of that particular element. Okay, so it is important to take note that it is the original, no, transaction price. So let's say, for example, you have purchased an asset, okay, such as inventories, o kaya naman mga prepaid expenses such as supplies, okay, property, plant, and equipment. Okay, so whatever is the costs or the price of it, no, at the time that you have purchased it, then that would act as your historical cost, since again, the price that gives rise to them. Okay. Also, take note that this historical cost, since we are referring to the original costs, okay, it does not reflect changes in value. So historical cost is the original cost and it does not change in value, except, no, merong exception based on the conceptual framework, up to the extent of changes because of the impairment of asset and liabilities. Okay, so technically hindi nagbabago yan, kasi pag nagbabago, let's say you will be considering the market value at some certain point in time, then hindi po siya historical cost. Now it will be discussed doon sa mga susunod na other measurement basis. By the way, may magtatanong, sir, paano naman po yung liabilities? Di ba kasi yung kanina asset, property, plant, and equipment, you have inventories, they have historical cost. So how about liabilities? So let's say, for example, you have purchased a merchandise. Hindi po ba? Merchandise. So the merchandise is at cost. Of course, when you acquire it on account, then you will have accounts payable. Thus, your accounts payable will also be recorded based on the historical cost or the transaction cost, even the notes payable. Okay, so again, it does not reflect the changes in value unless there is an impairment. So by the way, what is an impairment? Although it will be further discussed sa inyo sa intermediate accounting, no, on the part of magsisimula po yan sa inventories, kasi on the finals part, no, you will have impairment for inventories and then for property, plant, and equipment. So ang impairment po is the decrease in the value of an asset, okay, and also decrease in the value of a liability. Okay, so sir, bakit po siya nagde-decrease? Okay, that's because one example of impairment is depreciation. Okay, di ba? Kanina you purchase a property, plant, and equipment, and as you use it, then you have depreciation. And actually, that's impairment already, no? In simple term. Okay, it decreases the value. Even the liability was being impaired because sometimes, no, pag diniscuss nyo to sa intermediate accounting 3, then there would be some sort of causes why we have impairment. Okay, take note then as well, guys, that okay, historical costs of an asset. Okay, historical cost of an asset when you acquire it or when you purchase it also comprises the consideration paid to acquire or to create the asset plus transaction cost. So wag niyo tong kakalimutan, guys, ha, kasi in your discussion sa mga again intermediate accounting topics ninyo, okay, so there would be consideration there na pag bumili ka kasi ng isang asset, no, there will also be other transaction costs that you will incur, and you will just add those transaction costs as part of the historical cost of an asset. Example, no, pag binasa niyo po yung standard ng ito, madidiscuss nito sa finals ng Intac 1, okay, standard ng IAS number 2. Okay, so in IAS number 2, okay, your inventory should be recorded at purchase price, okay, purchase price, which is the acquisition cost actually, plus any directly attributable costs or transaction costs. Okay? Such as, ano ba yung mga possible transaction costs once you purchase it? Okay? Such as yung freight, di ba? Yung freight natin, yung transportation costs. Okay? So, ano pa? Mga taxes and duties. Okay, so bakit taxes and duties, sir? Di ba yung halimbawa, manggagaling sa abroad, then you will gonna be paying the duties in customs. Okay, so those were additional costs or transaction costs that, based on standard as well as here in the conceptual framework, as mentioned here in the third bullet, okay, comprises the historical costs. So again, when we talk about historical costs, it does not necessarily mean that it is only the original amount kung magkano yung binili mo, but also it includes those transaction costs. Okay? So however, in liabilities naman, 'di ba? Kung yung asset, okay, you have the purchase price plus transaction costs or directly attributable costs. For liability as well, no? Okay, take note that of course the original transaction cost for the liability will be considered. However, if you will have any transaction costs, okay, that you have incurred or take, no? Sabi kasi dito, when it is incurred or taken to its value of consideration received to incur or take on the liability minus transaction cost. So if there would be transaction cost, then somehow it will be deducted to your liability. One example actually niyan would be sa accounts kasi wala masyadong transaction cost. For your bonds, no? Bonds payable. You will be discussing that in Intermediate Accounting 3. Pag meron kayong bond issue costs, okay? So bond issue cost is the cost that you have incurred in issuance of a bonds. Sir, ano po yung bonds? Bonds is a certificate of indebtedness. Sir, anong pagkakaiba ng certificate of indebtedness sa promissory note? Yung promissory note, pwedeng gawin ng kahit sino. It is a negotiable instrument na kahit hindi i-registered, basta pirmahan ng maker, then that's already considered as an instrument. While a bonds needs to be registered to the Securities and Exchange Commissions, thus you will incur as well mga bond issue costs. Okay, so bond issue costs will decrease, okay, the carrying value or the historical value of that particular liability. Okay, so that's an example wherein sabi nga dito sa fourth bullet, no, you will be deducting the transaction costs. Okay? So take note as well that when we talk about historical costs, no, one way to apply this historical cost measurement basis in the financial assets and financial liabilities will be through the measurement of amortized costs. Okay, so eventually you might have heard this amortized cost. Kung ginamit na term sa inyo dati sa receivables is amortized cost instead of net realizable value. Okay, they are actually the same then, but amortized cost is more likely to be encountered in financial assets. Okay, sir, cash is financial asset, is that amortized cost? No. Okay, you will start that in accounts receivable. Okay, trade receivables, they could be presented at amortized cost, since diba you have the accounts receivable less the allowance for doubtful accounts if you use that. Okay, in your notes receivable, no, you will have amortization table. Okay, if you will encounter that in Intermediate Accounting 1. Okay, loan receivable, it will also be amortized. So those were the assets, no, examples lang ng asset that will be amortized. In liabilities naman, your notes payable will have amortized costs. It will undergo the process of amortization. Okay, so hindi ko man po siya ma-discuss dito ngayon since this is just a brief overview, no, on the specific subjects that I am mentioning. You will discuss that further, or you will discuss that in kumbaga deeper level. Kasi halimbawa yung bonds, it will took us around mga 3 to 4 meetings in ano yan, in discussions sa Intermediate Accounting 3. Okay, so they have amortized costs. Okay, so amortized cost is also part of the historical costs. Okay, so another thing in our historical costs is that historical cost of an asset is updated over time. So ina-update din pala siya. Sir, bakit kanina sinabi, di ba, that it does not reflect any changes? Okay, in accordance with the conceptual framework, it is updated over time. If lang, if applicable, okay, number one, consumption of part or economic resources constitutes the asset such as depreciation or amortization. Yun naman pala, no? Hindi naman talaga nagbabago yung value niya, but it's actually changing its amount or being updated because nagagamit na natin, 'di ba? So example, you have purchased your supplies, 'di ba? Which is recorded at historical costs and ginamit mo na siya. Then of course, yung let's say 1,000 pesos mo na supplies na gamit mo na, the historical cost, let's say, will go down to 200 pesos kasi 200 pesos na lang yung natitira sa kanya. And also, let's say for depreciation, di ba? On your property, plant, and equipment, you have purchased 1 million cost of equipment. And then ginamit mo, nagkaroon ka ng depreciation or accumulated depreciation na around 300,000 na. Okay, so your value already or the remaining value of that asset is what? 700,000 na lang. So again, the asset or the historical cost of an asset was being updated, number one, because of there is a consumption or there is already a decrease on its value. Not necessarily na ina-update natin yung value because of market conditions. Okay, so hindi po yun applicable in historical costs. Aside from that, no, in terms of receivables, for example, no, payments received that extinguish part or all of the assets, di ba? So pag naka-receive na tayo ng payment coming from the customer, o kaya naman naka-receive na tayo ng payment coming from our debtor, okay? So our receivable will now be decreased as well. Effects of events that cause part or all of the historical costs that will no longer be recoverable, which is impairment. Okay, by the way, impairment is part of IAS number 36, no? Impairment of asset na standard, at saka meron po tayong mga standards na applicable din po sa part nila yung mga individual impairment assessments or processes. Okay, na nasa loob mismo ng standard na yon. So again, as mentioned to you a while ago, there is a decrease in value of the asset, no, or even there is a no longer recoverable value, then you recognize impairment and it will simply update the historical costs of the asset. Accrued interest, no? Just in case na tayo po ay, 'di ba, nagpautang, nagpa-loan. Okay, we have receivables, we have notes receivables. Whenever there is an interest to be received, then it will also be updating the value. There would be an additional asset in if that's the case, 'di ba? Kasi from notes receivable, for example, no, it will have an interest receivable. Okay? So are we good on that one? All right. So that's also part of the historical cost which is being updated because of this applicability. Aside from that, we have as well for the liabilities, no? The liabilities are also updated because number one, no, nagkaroon po ng fulfillment or payment, no? Yung part o kaya naman lahat ng liabilities. So payment will decrease, of course, the value of that historical cost of the liability. Another would be the effect of events that increase the value of the obligation, no, to transfer the economic resource needed to fulfill the liability to such extent that the liability becomes onerous. Okay? So, kailan ba natin masasabi na yung liability ay onerous? Sabi dito, no, a liability is onerous if historical cost is no longer sufficient to depict the obligation to fulfill the liability. Okay, so it may somehow, no, being also telling us that the effects of the event would increase the obligation, and also it might be settled already. Last time we have discussed some executory contracts, no, iba siya dito sa onerous natin. Okay, executory is isang party lang yung naka-fulfill, not yet all, o kaya naman partially fulfilled on both parties kaya nagiging on executory. Okay? And lastly, no, of course, since this is liability, accrual of interest would also give rise to an updated value of our liabilities historical costs. Okay, so that's our historical cost, and take note, guys, that it refers to the value or the original transaction or the transaction price of the asset of which and liabilities as well, sorry, okay, that would give rise to its amount in our financial statement at its original or initial transaction. Okay? Original or acquisition transaction price. Okay? So that's historical costs. So we're done with the historical costs. So the next measurement basis, as mentioned to you kanina, is all about the, oh, sorry, I still have historical cost pala. Ayan. So, in addition, no, nabanggit na rin to kanina actually, no, kapag nagkaroon tayo ng consumption, okay, or nabenta na natin, of course, it will gives rise to an expense. So, kanina, di ba, when we consume the asset, no, let's say yung supplies na example ko, as we consume it, there would be a supplies expense, of course, no, with regards to that asset. O kaya naman, kapag nagbenta tayo, of course, then it would gives rise, if pag binenta natin, let's say for example, yung inventory, it will give rise to a cost of goods sold, which is considered as an expense. So it also considers in the discussion of the historical cost. No, consumption or sale of an asset will give rise to an expense. Another thing, no, is that if an entity acquires an asset, so pag bumili yung asset in one market, okay, and determines that the fair value using the prices is different from another market, then any differences, no? By the way, kapag bumili ka, 'di ba, malalaman mo, bumili ka ng inventory. Okay, naka naka-tag price siya. Ito yung kanyang value. Okay, let's say for example, 100 pesos yung inventory mo. So that's your fair value. Okay, actually malilito kayo bakit fair value siya, sir? Eh, 'di ba historical cost siya kasi that value on your end, no? When once you record it, it will become the costs. Yung fair value na other, which is an exit value for another entity, will be your entry value, which will now be recorded at historical costs. And ang gusto lang ipunto nitong last bullet is that if ever lang na mayroong changes in the value, let's say for example, the value of one is different from another, no, any difference daw in prices of the two markets could be recognized as an income. Okay? So pero don't worry guys, it will be thoroughly discussed sa'yo most likely sa let's say for example sa um, biological assets. Okay? So may mga other intermediate accounting topics kayo on which you will be mentioning this, that if there would be different in markets, then it would be reported as an income whenever there are differences in the value. Okay? So ayan lang yung historical costs. Okay, so dumako na tayo sa next topic, which is all about the current value naman. Okay, so when we talk about historical cost, it refers to the original transaction, no? The original price of an asset, and also an original amount of the liability on which the price of the transaction or other event gives rise to them. On the other hand, the second measurement basis, which is current value, okay, states that, okay, it is a measurement which provides monetary information about the elements of financial statements using, take note of this, updated uh, value or information updated to reflect the conditions at measurement. Okay, so most likely updated yung value ng current value. Sir, kanina 'di ba sa historical cost updated din? Updated siya in the sense na nababawasan kasi siya. Pero dito it is updated because we are considering some sort of, let's say, direct or indirect observation market, no? Or some basis na kumbaga pinanggagalingan kung bakit siya na-update compared with the historical cost because of consumptions, 'di ba, kanina nabayaran, so nagdi-decrease lang yung original cost. Ito, or even nag-i-increase doon kasi may accrual. Pero dito, no, it varies depending upon either the market or even the present value and other factors. Okay, so updated siya. The historical cost is not updated or does not considered any changes. So for current value, it has actually three items to discuss, no? Hindi lang siya basta-basta current value na siya. It has three considerations, okay, which includes fair value, value in use, and fulfillment value. Isa lang po yan. Mamaya we will discuss that. And current costs. Okay? So isa-isahin natin yan, no, yung mga information updated to reflect the conditions at measurement date. Okay? By first starting with our fair value. Okay? So pag sinabi po na fair value, by the way, this is only in the conceptual framework na discussion ha, because you have also an accounting standard, no? IFRS number 13, which is entitled Fair Value Measurement. Okay, so meron pang separate standard discussion ng fair value. Okay, mas detailed po doon. Ito in general for the fair value. So when we talk about fair value, okay, it is a price. Saan yung cursor ko? Ayan. It is a price that would give rise to sell an asset, take note of that, or paid to transfer a liability in an order transaction, okay, between market participants at measurement date. Okay, so parang kino-consider mo dito na fair value siya if there is a consideration of market participants. Okay? So ano po ba yung market participants? So these are actually participants in a market to which the entity has an access. So hindi lang ito yung basta sinasabi natin ay market, ano yan, tawag dito, palengke. Okay? Literal palengke, pero it refers to various entities as well, no, on which the entity natin, okay, has an access. Okay? It could be a market of let's say for example the loan or the banks, no, the market value that came from all of the banks, okay, and others, no, on which you sell that particular asset. In some cases, take note, the fair value can be determined directly by observing the prices in the active market. So you just simply observe the prices in the active market. Okay, so you can get already the fair value. So let's say, for example, if you go to, let's say, for purchase of, let's say, biological assets now, which are considered under recorded at fair value less cost to sell, pero you observe the market, okay, yung mga animals, okay, once you buy it, titignan mo magkano ba siya dun sa market. Okay, you observe the prices, no? Okay? And take note guys that even though sabi kanina, the fair value could be observed in active market, there will be some cases that direct observation is not possible. That's why you can get by using indirect, no, measurement techniques, okay, yung ating fair value. So how was that? It could be through the use of estimates of future cash flows. So you can estimate of future cash flows, no? There would be possible variations in the estimated amount and timing because of uncertainty inherent to the cash flow. By the way, we have outcome uncertainty, no? Which is the uncertainty in terms of the outcome or amount or timing of a particular cash flow. Okay, you need to consider that if you are in you are computing using an indirect measurement technique under fair value. Okay, another would be time value of money. Of course, it is more on the talk about the money today is not the same with the money in the future. Another would be prices for bearing uncertainty inherent. Okay, so which is risk premium and risk discount. So it's more on the uncertainty kasi pag nag-discuss kayo ng risks and returns sa financial management nyo in second year, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so you will consider uncertainties such as risk premium and risk discounts. Okay, and also other factors related to market participants, no, would take those factors into account. So again, fair value is more on the price, okay, that you will put into an asset being sold o kaya naman paid to transfer a liability, okay, which considers market participant, and fair value could be observed either directly and indirectly through some measurement techniques. Okay, so also take note that when there is a current value, the fair value is not increased by any transaction costs. Kanina, in the historical costs was increased by transaction costs. As mentioned to you, di ba, example ko, mga directly attributable costs in bringing the assets to its current location. Okay, and also it is not decreased by any transaction cost in terms of liabilities. So which is also the same, the different with the historical cost, kasi sa historical costs any transaction cost for the liability should decrease, no, our historical cost. So sa fair value it will not be taken into account. Fair value does not reflect transaction costs. Okay, also that would incur in ultimate disposal. So meaning, pag nag-aral kayo rin ng biological asset, no, yung fair value less cost to sell nyo, okay, is not actually considered in terms of this conceptual framework kasi we do not deduct the cost to sell, okay, or the cost of disposal in the fair value itself. Itong fair value na to, ito yung fair value, pero we do not deduct any disposal costs. Okay? So, may mga madadaanan kayong mga assets dyan, no, such as yung nabanggit ko nga kanina, that would considered cost to sell or disposal, but that does not entail any fair value. Okay? Okay. So, we're done with fair value. Okay? Next, we have, okay, wait lang Okay, are you still okay? Okay, so next on the list of the current value, aside from fair value, which is considering the market, no, the market participants, okay, are the value in use in terms of assets and fulfillment value in terms of liabilities. So let's talk about value in use first. So pag sinabi niyong value in use, okay, which you will encounter in the property, plant, and equipment under the discussion of the revaluation model, okay? So value in use is a present value of cash flows. So that is old standard, old conceptual framework, di ba, nabanggit ko na one of the measurement basis is present value. But right now, no, the definition of present value is already being incorporated here in the current value under value in use and fulfillment value. So again, going back, value in use is the present value of cash flows or other benefits that an entity expects from the use of an asset, okay, and its ultimate disposal. So technically, no, as you compute value in use, pagdating nyo nga doon sa property, plant, and equipment, okay, you will be considering how much is the amount that you are expecting in the future for this particular asset. So you compute using some sort of interest rate. Kaya nga po during the times na wala pa tayong klase, I have sent the president with some video about computing present value because that is important for your subjects, no, intermediate accounting, as well as here in our subject, no, because value in use is one thing that you need to consider na present value of the cash flow. And take note, value in use is applicable for assets. Okay? Assets po. So, we compute the present value and ano yung mga importante dyan? Of course, yung cash flows. Ano pa yung mga importante? Yung time. Okay, kasi you need gaano ba katagal yung expected na cash flows na yon for this particular asset and also the interest rate. So, interest rate would depend upon the discount rate to be used in a particular situation. Okay, applicability will be depending upon as well the accounting standard. Okay, so ayan, so present value of a cash flow of an asset, value in use. Samantalang, okay, a fulfillment value naman is a present value of cash, okay, and other economic resources that you are expected to transfer to fulfill a liability. So expectation amount that you will be paying in the future. Okay, so i-compute mo yung present value. What's the value today of this particular liability? Yung value in use. What's the value today of that asset? Okay? So, on a separate video na pwede kong i-share sa inyo or actually na-share ko na rin sa inyo, no? You can find out or even see how to compute the present value, no? Using various situations. Okay? So, considering value in use, no? And fulfillment value, which are based on future cash flows, take note, they do not include as well transaction costs in acquiring or even taking the liability. Okay? So just like the fair value, 'di ba sa fair value, we do not consider transaction costs. Historical cost lang talaga yung malakas, no, na nag-i-include ng transaction costs. Okay? So hindi po ulit kino-considered ang transaction costs in value in use and fulfillment value. However, take note, okay, that value in use as well and fulfillment value, okay, include present value of any transaction costs. Okay? Sir, bakit kino-consider? Hintayin mo muna, no? Expect on the ultimate disposal and on fulfilling. Okay? Yung binanggit kanina, acquiring and taking. Ibig sabihin, at the time that you have bought the asset, okay, at merong transaction costs, do not include it in the value in use. If it is liability, no, you should not take or you should not include the transaction cost kapag tinitake mo pa lang yung liability, no, using the fulfillment value. But if it is already for ultimate disposal, so you are expecting to spend it after 10 years, no, yung amount na yon, because we are talking about time as well in computation of the present value for an asset, and on the time that you're going to fulfill, no, ang difference niya, ito fulfill nasa future, yung taking ngayon, no. So pag fulfilling and ultimate disposal, then you will consider them, yung mga transaction cost na yon, for the present value. Okay? So i-clarify lang natin. Ulitin natin ha. Yung value in use muna, which is referring to the present value of the cash flow of an asset, will not include the transaction costs on acquiring that asset. Okay? Pero it will include the transaction costs expected for the ultimate disposal. Kasi futuristic yon. It includes the future cash flow. Samantalang, sa liability for fulfillment value, okay, so it includes, or it is the present value of cash flow for the liability, okay. It does not include the transaction costs when taking, okay, the liability, but it will include transaction costs on fulfilling the liability. Okay? So ano-ano ba yung mga example nung acquiring asset? Yung kanina example ko na sa inyo, 'di ba, yung mga pag nagbumili kayo, there will be additional transaction cost or directly attributable cost, no? Hindi kasama 'yon. Ano ba yung mga possible sa ultimate disposal? So pwede pong, let's say for example, you will spend decommissioning, o kaya naman you will spend some sort of um, cost to dispose, no, a particular asset. So yun, pwede siyang sumama sa present value na yun, and even on fulfilling that asset. So once you pay, there is an additional amount to pay, then that's also included in the fulfillment value. Okay? Take note as well that value in use and fulfillment value reflect entity-specific assumptions rather than market participants. So, unlike with the fair value, which considers the market participants, value in use and fulfillment value does not use the market participants. Okay, kasi nga entity-specific. So, kung ano yung ini-estimate ni company na expected cash flows, no, which you're going to use in the computations, then yun lang po yung maisasama sa value in use and fulfillment value. Tandaan nyo ha, magkaiba yun. Pag tinanong kayo, tignan nyo maigi kung asset ba to, current value ba siya na related sa asset, o kaya liabilities, baka kasi mamaya, no, hindi nyo binasa, okay, it is just a present value, tapos sinagot nyo value in use, baka mamaya nakadugtong liabilities, so the answer should be fulfillment value. So ingatan nyo lang yung tanong ha, pag tinutukoy yung value in use and fulfillment value, since they are of the same line under conceptual framework, pero magkaiba sila ng kumbaga atake, kasi asset yung isa for the value in use and liability for the fulfillment value. Okay? So I hope that you're still doing great. Okay, there. Sana naiintindihan nyo pa yung discussion ko. Are you still okay, guys? Okay, so kung gusto nyo pong mag-pause and go to the CR or even kumain, then you can do so, okay? So you can fulfill yourself, Okay? Even you can dispose yourself. Sorry, hindi ka naman basura na sinabi niyang basura ka. Hindi. Okay? Joke lang. Okay? You are all precious. Sige. So, let's continue. Bigla-bigla na naman bumabanat si sir na wala namang kausap. Sorry, ikaw yung kausap ko. Ikaw. Ikaw na iniwan niya. Ikaw na hindi pinansin niya. Okay? Because you don't have any value at all. Joke lang. May value ka. Okay? At ang value mo could be, okay, the last one for the current value is current costs. Okay? Paulit-ulit, current value, no? Current cost pa. Okay? Wala tayong magagawa. Yun yung nasa conceptual framework eh. Okay? Ano bang sabi sa conceptual framework regarding the current costs? So, a current cost daw of an asset, so magkahiwalay na naman na, okay? The current cost of an asset is the costs of an equivalent asset at the measurement date. Okay? Cost of equivalent assets. So, ibig sabihin, are you referring, sir, na halimbawa, yung asset na binili natin, hindi yun yung tinutukoy niya na value? Hindi, no? Kasi we are referring to the equivalent asset. So, pag bumili ka ng machine, for example lang, example lang niya, machine, okay? So, this is the value of the machine, and then an equivalent machine, nakaparehas niya on the same date, okay? Ito yung price, then that's the current costs. Okay? Equivalent asset kasi. At the measurement date, and take note of this guys, no? Comprising the consideration that would be at the measurement date plus transaction costs. Ayan, no? Ang pinagkaiba nitong current cost na to doon sa dalawang nauna under the current value is that it considers transaction costs at the date that you have incurred. Yung fair value kanina bawal, no? Yung incurred, yung ano naman, value in use naman, 'di ba? Hindi pwede yung transaction cost at you acquire only the ultimate disposal cost yung kasama. Okay? So dito sa current cost, your equivalent, no? Costs of that asset, no? Nakaparehas na asset at that time that you have purchased it or you have acquired it plus any transaction costs. Sir, bakit pa natin kailangan kunin yung kailangan kunin yung price nung other asset? Bakit di na lang natin kunin yung certain price nitong um, asset na to talaga? Okay, because there are some circumstances that the equivalent price of the asset is more reliable rather than the value of this current asset na meron ka, or the value of this asset on its face. Okay? So ayun. Another would be current costs of a liability naman. So under pa rin siya ng current cost, no? It is a consideration that you will receive for an equivalent liability, no? So pag nangutang ka ngayon, halimbawa ganito yung utang mo, if sana nangutang ka sa iba, okay, ito yung value niya, okay? Minus of course again any transaction costs. Kasi yung kanina rin sa fulfillment value, we do not consider the transaction cost, okay? So take note guys that current costs is equivalent asset or liabilities plus or minus any transaction costs. Okay? And then also, take note that current cost is more on entry value. Okay? So, bakit entry value? Kasi nga, once we acquire, sabi kanina dito, di ba? At the measurement date, at the time that you have acquired, you have incurred that, then i-add mo yung transaction cost. So, it's more on entry value. Okay? So, the amount that you're going to record in the balance sheet at the time that you have acquired it or you have initially recorded that. Pero, no, yung fair value at saka value in use na una natin diniscuss kanina, they are more on exit value. Sir, bakit exit value? Yung fair value kasi kanina, di ba? That's the value at the time that you have sold the asset, di ba? Or fulfilled the asset. Ganun din sa value in use, di ba? Sa value in use is the present value of the future cash flows. And also, the fulfillment value is the present value of all of the future cash flows then up to its fulfillment or payment. Kaya they are considered as exit value. Okay? Actually, historical cost is as well an entry value. So, pwede mo i-consider as entry value yung historical cost since you can record it at costs. Okay? So, I hope na naintindihan natin just to simply summarize, meron pa ba ako? Okay, so mamaya na yung equity. So, as to asset and liabilities, no, itong unang set ng measurement basis natin. So, for historical costs, okay, we have to record it, okay, at the amount on which that particular asset or liability arises, okay, or the original transaction costs, or the original price plus transaction costs, or minus transaction cost kung liability. Okay, samantalang kapag current value, okay, current value is updating the value, no, has the updated information, okay, which considers number one, either fair value, okay, which the amount that you are going to expect, no, if you dispose that asset or if you sell that asset, okay, and it does not consider any transaction cost at all. Kapag naman value in use or even fulfillment value, it actually includes the present value of the cash flows. But it does not what? Consider the transaction costs at the initial recognition or at the time that you take it or acquire the particular asset or liability. But it considers the what? It considers the transaction costs at ultimate disposal at saka at what? Fulfillment. Lastly, for the current costs, okay, it is the cost of the equivalent asset naman, which also considers na transaction costs at the time it has incurred minus transaction cost naman kung ito ay liability. Okay? And current cost is considered as entry value, while fair value and value in use or fulfillment value are exit value. Okay? So I hope nagkakaintindihan tayo ha. So those are most likely the measurement basis that you will encounter on the various standards. By the way, yung mga ibang standards natin, it's not yet updated since most of them are old standards, and this conceptual framework have been created and adopted, di ba? Starting 2018. Kaya some of the standard are still in the process of amendment, pero still, no, ang sabi kasi natin kanina, standard yung masusunod. So kung ano yung nakalagay sa standard na measurement natin for asset and liabilities, yun muna yung i-record natin. But if there is none mentioned in that standard, then punta tayo dito sa mga nabanggit natin in terms of conceptual framework. Okay? So we have already discussed valuation or measurement as to asset and liabilities. Paano naman po yung equity? Okay, so now let's talk about the measurement of equity. So since guys, yung asset and liabilities kanina, it can use various measurement bases. So at the end of the day, since equity is the residual interest, ang nangyayari po, yung value ng ating equity is not measured directly, no? So ibig sabihin, hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na ay current value ka, ay ikaw historical cost ka, ikaw na equity ka. So you cannot measure it directly. Why? Because you need to consider kung magkano po ba yung valuation mo or measurement mo sa lahat ng asset mo na na-record, okay, less any carrying value or amount ng iyong liability. So parang ganun pa rin yung mangyari, no? Kung ano yung residual interests na value, okay, after deducting the liabilities from the asset, yun yung magiging value ng ating equity. Okay? Are we good on that? All right. So again, if you do have any questions, please key in your questions to our respective chat boxes, 'di ba? O masasabi natin na based on the conceptual framework, may halaga ang mga bagay-bagay. So wag mo sabihin sa sarili mong wala kang halaga kasi you could be measured either at fair value, at historical, yung value mo dati, okay, or even fulfillment value or value in use na lang, or even your current costs. Okay? So, I hope naintindihan po natin yung mga measurement basis and principles po natin. Okay? So, right now, we will be moving forward to a new chapter, no, new chapter talaga, no? Another chapter, which is presentation and disclosure. Okay, so in your standards, individual standards, actually, it has already the contents of presentation and disclosure. So sa simula niyan, it talks about presentation, yung standard, and then sa dulo, what are the required disclosures. So that's on the standard. But again, if we do not have anything in the standard, then balik tayo dito, at least we have chapter 7 to provide us the information. Okay? So let's start, no, with this presentation and disclosure as a communication tool. Okay? So sa conceptual framework, it considers presentation and disclosure as communication tools. Why? Because the reporting entity or the business communicates the elements of the financial statement by presenting. Okay, pag sinabi natin presenting, is more on recognizing at saka putting the amount measurement in the financial statement, as well as disclosing some relevant and faithfully represented information in our financial statements. Okay, so eventually, when we talk about the reporting entity communicates the information, it should be an effective communication of that information to the user. How? No? By putting relevant and faithfully represented information of our entities, assets, liabilities, equity, income, and expenses. Of course naman po, no, sa pagkatapos natin ng discussion last time ng qualitative characteristics, hindi po ba dapat yung ni-recognize natin, okay, at saka yung mineasure natin na amounts of that element should really represent relevant information as well as faithfully represented information. Now, in accordance with the conceptual framework, you will have an effective communication of financial information, okay, if um, you have done focusing on the financial on the presentation and disclosure objectives and principles rather than rules. Okay, so again, in each of the standards as well as here in the conceptual framework, it gives us the concept about presentation and disclosure objectives and principles, no? Meron pong mga mahabang discussion yan sa mga standards, and we should focus on that rather than the rules, specifically sa rules ng company kung ano lang gusto niya. Kasi kung ano lang gusto niya, yun ilalagay natin, edi magiging hindi relevant yun sa ibang users, 'di ba? Take note of our discussion last time with regards to the financial statements. Okay? And also, effective communication requires as well classifying the information, okay, in the manner that you group them similar items. So mamaya, no, or even in the discussion pagdating ng um, presentation of financial statement in IES number 1, no, we could group similar items. By the way, I think na-discuss din natin to last time in the previous video about aggregation, 'di ba? That we add the similar items and also we separate the similar items. Okay? So kasi pag pinagsama-sama natin yung similar, it would be easier for the users to understand. And also, aggregating some information in such a way that it will not obscure either unnecessarily details or by excessive aggregation. So, we just simply aggregate or pinag-add lang natin, sinasum up lang natin kung ano yung dapat, no, in accordance with the required presentation. Okay, not necessarily lahat i-aggregate mo kahit hindi kinakailangan. Okay, so that's how we could effectively communicate the information. So kanina nabanggit that in effective communication, we need to have a presentation and disclosure objectives and principles to be used rather than rules. So ano-ano po ba yung sa presentation and disclosure? Okay, objectives and principles, no? The balance, or there is a balance, no, in our presentation and disclosure, okay, needed between, okay, giving the entities flexibility. So we need to give flexibility in terms of providing relevant information that faithfully represents the elements. Okay, so yung flexibility na yun, of course, most likely it would be given as well doon sa mga standards natin, that it will direct some sort of certain principles and objectives on that standard, pero it also gives the kumbaga mga presenters or reporting entity ng another flexibility. Kasi sa mga standards po, hindi naman sasabihin, okay, ito yung gamitin mong title. Okay, hindi naman po talaga binibigay yung title. They just suggest or encourage you to use the title, pero you can kumbaga change it o kaya naman edit it depending upon your entity's discretion. Okay, so yun yung flexibility. And also, requiring information that is comparable from both period to period, okay, or even comparing reporting entity in another entities, no? So in our discussion last time, diba, financial information needs to be comparable. Okay, so again, it's part of our presentation and disclosure objectives and principles that you need to take into account. Aside from that, okay, effective communication in financial statement is also supported by considering the following principles na kung saan the entity's specific information is more useful than standardized description or tinatawag natin na boilerplate. Okay, so ano ibig sabihin nun? Nabanggit ko nga ho kanina, no, that when you use titles, okay, kasi dito standardized descriptions, okay, we could be able to use whatever is specific to our entity. Let's say, for example, sa atin, cash and cash equivalents ang nakalagay, no? Sa standard, sa IAS number 1. Pero sa totoo lang, wala ka namang cash equivalents. So, why use the cash equivalents in IAS number 1? So, cash na lang, di po ba? Okay, even merchandise inventory. Kung ano yung applicable sa entity, yun na lang ang gamitin. Pero still, kahit applicable siya, we should use and take note that that information will be read by various users. So again, when you considered the entity-specific information rather than the standardized description, kanina, balikan lang natin na binigyan tayo ng flexibility pero it should be relevant and faithfully representing our elements. Okay? Another would be duplication of information in different parts is usually unnecessary and can make the financial statements uh, less understandable. Okay, so paano po ba yung duplication of information? Maybe baka mamaya example ko lang to ha. Example lang sa presentation mo. Let's say for example, nakalagay cash on hand, cash on bank, cash ganito, cash ganito. Naka-itemize yung cash mo pero actually pwede mo naman siyang gawing isa, no? Because it duplicates, puro cash siya. Gawin mo nilang isa para pag binasa, ito yung cash and then nasa explanation na lang. O kaya naman, baka sa explanation mo sa notes to financial statements, you seem to be redundant, kagaya ng ginagawa ko, di ba? Baka sinasabi nyo, ay, nagiging redundant na si sir. Okay, so it already makes the information less understandable. Okay, so those are some principles na you need to consider for effective communications of the financial information. Okay, so as part as well of our pangalan nito, um, presentation and disclosure, no? And it is important for us to classify properly. So, part of it, no, the discussion is classification, which refers to sorting our assets or the elements actually in the financial statement on the basis of shared characteristics, no, for presentation and disclosure purposes. So, how do we classify? How do we sort these elements? So, we classify dissimilar assets. Take note, classifying dissimilar assets or liabilities, equity, income, or expenses together can obscure relevant information. Nabanggit na to kanina, no? Paulit-ulit. Reduce understandability and comparability and may not provide faithful representation of what it purports to represent. So, dapat, no, pag tayo ay nag-classify, it should not be dissimilar. We need to avoid dissimilar items. It should be as much as possible mga similar items. So how do we classify actually? In our statement of financial position, we classify our assets or even the liabilities, no? Yung famous na classification natin na current and non-current components. Okay? So that we could be able to understand, i-define naman natin yan pag diniscuss natin sa presentation of financial statement na ito yung basis para maging current, ito rin yung basis para maging non-current siya. Okay? Even kung hindi man po siya classified under current or non-current, it may be classified under based on the liquidity of the entity. Okay? Sometimes, of course, si equity, no, walang current, non-current doon. In equities part, okay, we could classify it by providing useful information, okay, such as you separate the claims based on its different characteristics. So let's say for example, sa equity natin, hindi naman natin usually pinagsasama yung sasabihin lang natin share capital. Kung dalawang um, klase ng share ka, let's say preference at saka ordinary, no? Mas maganda pa rin that you are going to classify it, okay, ordinary ka, ordinary share capital, and then preference share capital, okay, or share capital yung pinaka heading niya, pero nandun yung preference and ordinary, also share premium o kaya naman additional paid in capital, okay, and retained earnings whether appropriated or unappropriated. So again, the classification would define how we are going to present it, but technically that presentation, no, once we classify, should be kumbaga making sense and useful for the decision makers. Okay, so again, no, that's classification. Any question? Wala? Okay. Ay, nalimutan ko, mayroon pa pala income and expense. How do we classify them? So sabi dito, income and expense would result from unit of account selected in assets and liabilities, and components of such income and expense have different characteristics and are identified separately. So most likely po that your income and expenses, no, would be classified lang as income and expenses, no? Kasi for PAS number 1 pwede nating gawin for income and expenses. For income kasi pwede tayong maglagay ng operating income and non-operating income. Okay? So pero at the end of the day, that will be your total income. Sa expenses naman, meron tayong mga simple classification such as administrative ba siya, no? Is it selling and marketing expenses, administrative, ano pa, mga losses, 'di ba? Actually, as part as well of the income and expenses, income statement ninyo, meron pa kayong other comprehensive income na title. Okay, so those were the typical classification. And again, most likely we will encounter this classifications pag diniscuss na nga natin yung accounting standard na IAS number 1 for the presentation of financial statements. Okay, so are we good on that? So that's the end of chapter. End na ba? Ano ba yan? Sorry po, inaantok na si Sir. Pero ayun, last slide na for classification. Okay? Ikaw wag kang antukin diyan. Okay? Wag kang aantukin diyan. Tandaan mo, kailangan mong pumasa. Okay? Kalabitin mo yung sarili mo. Kailangan mong pumasa. Okay? Sige. So to continue, as part of the discussion ng classification, you have offsetting. Okay, so you will heard this and actually might be heard already in your cash and cash equivalent discussion, no? Pero offsetting is not allowed there. But when we talk about offsetting, it happens when the entity recognizes and measures both asset and liability of separate unit of account but group them in a single amount in the statement of financial position. Okay? So, meron po kasi tayong you could be technically see, no, may mga items that you have offset, no, na pag sinabi offset, you have one item and another item, no, pinagdeduct mo sila so that it will be presented as a single item in the statement of financial position. Okay, so that is offsetting. Pero take note, pag diniscuss natin ang offsetting in the various standard, no, offsetting, baka nakakala nyo, let's say for example, receivable less allowance, no, akala nyo offsetting na, actually hindi po yun offsetting. Okay, even yung cost ng property, plant and equipment less pangalan nga nun, less accumulated depreciation, that's not offsetting. Okay, so may mga specific circumstances na offsetting is allowed, but in general rule, pagdating ng IAS number 1, no, is not allowed. Pero dinidiscuss lang dito na you could, no, offset or put it in a single amount. Pero yung usual and typical in terms of classification sa ating financial statements are aggregation. So pag sinabing aggregation, this is the process of adding together an asset or liabilities or equity or income or expenses, okay, in shared characteristics. So yun nga, kagaya ng sa chapter 1 ninyo, sa intermediate accounting, di ba, you have cash and cash equivalent. That's already an aggregated item ng ano, cash on hand, cash in bank, okay, ano pa? You have the what? Mga other funds, 'di ba? Cash equivalents din. Okay? So iba-iba siya ng mga items pero you have put it into one. So yun yung aggregation natin. Okay? So I hope naintindihan natin na pagpasensya nyo na medyo akala ko tapos na eh. So thank you very much guys. So this is the end of chapter number 7, no? Presentation and disclosure. So konti na lang guys, okay? So we are now down to our last chapter for the conceptual framework. Okay, so which is entitled Concepts of Capital and Capital Maintenance Concept. Actually, itong chapter 8 na to, or even kung hindi man siya chapter 8, ibang chapter siya doon sa mga previous sa mga conceptual framework. But this particular concepts of capital and capital maintenance concept is yung natitira na lang na part na hindi na-revise since 1989. 'Di ba? 1989 unang ni-release yung first na version ng framework. Okay, so eto na lang yung natitira, no? Buti pa to nagstay ng matagal. Kayo hindi. Joke lang, okay? So this is more on the conceptual framework, okay? So ito na lang ho yung natitirang hindi po nagagalaw based po sa nakalagay sa conceptual framework, okay? So now let's talk about the concepts of capital first. Okay, so in the concepts of capital, it pertains into two concepts, no, ng ating capital. One would be the financial concept, okay, of capital, na ang sabi po sa conceptual framework, it is referring or synonymous to the net assets or equity of the entity. So di po ba pag capital, nabanggit natin to in our elements that it is the residual interest of the equity, or it is the residual interest of the owners in the asset after deducting the liability. And actually that is referring to the net assets, no, which is our equity, and that equity in accordance with the financial concept of capital is referring to the um, capital itself. Okay, ayun no, capital. Okay? Example, binigay sa conceptual framework are invested money o kaya naman invested purchasing power. Okay? So, this is the most commonly used na concepts ng capital. Alam na alam nyo naman yan kasi 'di ba that's where we have the accounting equation, no? The financial concept of capital. Samantalang, the other concept of capital was the physical concept of capital. Okay, ito hindi ba natin na-encounter to, even me, no? But sabi dito, this is such as operating capability, that your capital will be regarded based on the productive capacity of the entity, such as output or units per day. So, ganun. I haven't seen yet, no, sa totoo lang. Even I searched the internet, no, wala pa po ako nakikitang any company that uses the physical concept of capital, but they are just regarding the productive capacity of the entity. Okay? So, ayan. Those are the concepts of capital natin. Now, next would be concepts of capital maintenance and also determination of profit. Okay, so pag sinabi nating concept of capital maintenance, it's actually concerned with how the entity defines its capital that it seeks to maintain. Okay, so typically, paano ba natin pinipresent, paano ba natin kinocompute yung profit, that's actually more on the linkages, no, itong capital maintenance na to, of the capital itself and the concepts of profit. Okay, because it provides point of references where our profit is being measured. So how do we maintain our capital? By profit, di ba, the movement of it most likely, no, which includes the profit or net income of our entity. Okay, so we have two capital maintenance concepts. Okay, may dalawa rin po. At ano po yun? We have number one, yung financial capital maintenance. Kanina, financial concept of capital. Okay? It refers to the capital or equity itself. Ito naman, paano po yung maintenance ng capital or financial capital maintenance. Okay? In accordance with this concept, okay, our profit, take note itong profit na nakalagay sa conceptual framework. This is actually referring na rin to our net income. Okay? Earned only if the financial amount of the net asset, so yung capital mo daw at the end of the period, exceeds the financial or money amount of the net assets at the beginning, okay, excluding any distributions to and contributions from the owners of during the period. So actually parang ganito yan, no? Yung capital or equity ending natin, 'di ba? Actually parang ito napag-aralan niyo nito sa basic accounting. Equity ending, okay, minus the equity beginning pag tumaas, okay, then we will have a profit. Of course, excluding the distributions. So this is the actual definition based on the conceptual framework. But let me just put it in a way na maintindihan natin siya by putting it in an equation. Okay? So paano po ba? 'Di ba yung net assets kanina, that is also referring to our capital, and the capital is what? Asset less liabilities. So if you have increase in asset, so ganito po yung gusto kong mangyari dito. Increase in asset, okay, um, minus any decrease in asset, okay, pag nag-increase yung liability, of course, magdi-decrease yung what? Ano natin, net assets, di ba? Pag nag-decrease yung liability, of course, there is a corresponding increase in the net asset. That's why, okay, this is referring to the increase in our what? Capital, yung difference ng net asset beginning at saka ng net asset ending. Okay? So pero, sabi nga rin kanina, no, exclude the distribution. Ano ba yung distribution na tinutukoy? Yung dividends. Okay? So, di ba ang dividends mina-minus sa capital? Pero dahil we work back yung net income or net profit, then, okay, ina-add natin. Even yung contributions from. So pag nag-contribute or pag nagkaroon ng additional purchase ng shares, 'di ba, sa corporations, then it will increase the capital, but that does not represent what? A profit. So any issuance of capital for this computation na work back ng profit would be deducted, okay? And please take note of these other items, no, even though it's not provided in the definition, pero take note, these are other items on the increase and decrease in our shareholders' equity, but no profit or loss are being founded here. Okay? Ano-ano po ba yon? Saglit lang ha, pindutin ko tong button. Okay? Examples ng mga yon ay, ayan. Ay, bakit maintenance adjustment? Saan na yon? Ayan. So it may include, okay, so yung adjustments kanina, that does not represent any assets or it does not represent any profit or loss, may include, okay, changes in revaluation surplus. Pag diniscuss nyo na po yung PPE, okay, kasi yung revaluation surplus na yan, napupunta po yan sa equity. Actually, in overview, the revaluation surplus is the increase in the value of a property, plant, and equipment compared with the carrying value using the revaluation model. Okay, so abangan nyo yan sa Intac 1. Okay, also, hindi rin po nag-a-arise sa profit or loss, pero nagiging cost ng increase or decrease in our shareholders' equity or capital ay yung actuarial gains and losses. Okay, these are actually terminologies used to represent any difference of the actual versus expected results coming from IAS number 19. And ano ba yung IAS number 19 na yan? Employee benefits, which you will be discussing in Intermediate Accounting 3. Another would be any gain or losses arising from translating the financial statements from foreign operations, yung forex gain or losses. foreign exchange gain or loss na in accordance with your discussion na pagdating ng accounting for business combination na subject, these gains or losses in the foreign operations or foreign exchange will be part of the other comprehensive income, which will cause to increase or decrease the equity or capital but is not related to the profit or loss. Okay, and also some sort of cash flow hedging pagdating ninyo sa um, tawag dito, investments. Okay, so ito lang po yung mga capital maintenance adjustments na again, nabanggit doon sa formula. Kung babalikan ko po yung formula, okay, ayan, no? They may cause increase or decrease in our equity but does not represent any profit or loss. So at the end of the day, your capital maintenance concept is computing for the net profit or loss. So para kayong nag-squeeze, ika nga kung gumagamit kayo ng Valix or nagwo-work back kayo ng net profit or loss. Actually, this computation is applicable if you are given the data kung magkano po yung net assets beginning or ending or even assets or liabilities and the other items, no, if they want you to work back with the profit. Pero usually kasi ang ginagawa natin, di ba, we prepare the statement of comprehensive income, the income statement or profit or loss part, no, to compute for the net profit or loss. Okay, but you may encounter this as well, no, in some of the problems. By the way, no, technically yung net assets, alam nyo na ulit yung computation ha, net asset would be your asset less liability. Baka malimutan nyo po yan. Okay? So to continue, for the financial capital maintenance, it can be measured either in nominal monetary units or constant purchasing power. So kanina in the definition ng financial concepts of capital, capital is regarded as purchasing power or invested capital. So this is also the same with this concept, pero it's more on the determination of profit or the capital maintenance. And lastly, no, this financial capital maintenance concept do not require the use of a particular measurement basis. Okay, so bakit po walang particular measurement basis? Kanina nabanggit na natin yan, no? Dahil for our accounting or even in the measurement of equity, no, kung ano po yung naging basihan na measurement ng asset at saka liability, no, that is their basis, pero yung residual interest, yun lang yung mapupunta sa capital. So meaning dito, wala tayong specific kasi yung asset and liability na nagko-comprise sa net assets, iba-iba yung kanilang measurement basis. Okay? So I hope that you have understand the financial capital maintenance concept natin. Okay? So that's the first concept of capital maintenance, and the last, okay, and not the least, you have the physical maintenance, which is actually related, physical capital maintenance, which is related doon sa physical concept of capital, wherein yung profit naman po, okay, is regarded or earned if you have the productive capacity ending, okay, at the end of the period exceeds naman yung physical productive capacity at the beginning, of course, excluding as well any distribution and contributions from the owners. So instead na net asset kanina, 'di ba? Kanina we have net asset ending versus net asset beginning. Okay, which is iniba ko lang yung formula kanina kasi gusto ko ipakita paano kapag asset and liabilities yung given. Of course, you have the increase and decrease, and then you have dividends or even the contributions, no? And then you have the net loss. Okay, so typically dito po sa physical capital maintenance, parang ganun din, pero again sa maintenance concept na to, your capital is regarded as the physical productive capacity. So your physical productive capacity ending minus the beginning, so that will be equal to increase or decrease. So pag mas mataas yung ending kaysa sa beginning, then we have an increase. Pag mas mataas yung beginning kaysa sa ending, then we have a decrease. Okay? Then we have to add back any dividends that was given. Actually, nalimutan ko rin dito, if ever that you have additional wala naman kasing issue one since this is not 'di ba? This is not equity on the issuance of shares. It's more on the physical productive capacity. So baka meron contributions if any. Okay? So pwedeng i-minus po yun. But the dividends will be added back since it was deducted nung pababa na computation. So to arrive on our net profit or loss. Sir, bakit ba tayo nagpapakahirap na intindihin yan? Hindi naman ginagamit yan. It's just part of the conceptual framework. Okay? Huwag ka na maangal. Okay? And lastly, kanina kung financial capital maintenance concept tayo, no? Wherein we don't have any specific basis for our measurement ng capital. Dito po sa physical capital maintenance concept, since we are using productive capacity, then we adopt the current cost basis. And sa totoo lang, no, sa mga accounting standards natin na di-discuss, wala naman po talagang lahat na current cost lang ang basis. It may vary depending upon sa diniscuss natin kanina na mga measurement basis. Okay? So, I think we are done already. So I hope po na naintindihan ninyo yung ating discussion ng conceptual framework. Okay, so again, if you do have any questions, please key in your questions to our respective chat boxes. Okay, pag meron kang hindi naintindihan, na itanong mo. Okay, so again, any questions, clarification, violent reaction, kung inaantok ka, okay, so gumising ka. Ang corny ni Sir, di ba? Okay, so kung wala na po kayong questions, again, that's the end of the Conceptual Framework, Chapter 2 po natin. Okay, so I'll see you all on our next video presentation for the other topics under our Conceptual Framework and Accounting Standards. So again, this is your instructor, now signing off for the Conceptual Framework discussion. Okay, so bye-bye guys and have a great day. Stay safe everyone. Mahal ka nun. Okay? Mahal ka nun. Yun nga lang. Okay, mahal mo kaya siya. De joke lang. Okay, bye-bye na. Okay, bye-bye.